All right, I want to introduce you to two people who I met a long time ago back, I believe it was in 2006. So 5 years after U.S. forces had deployed to Afghanistan, one of them was, along with the Marines, along with the 101st Airborne, there was 10th Mountain Division. And these were soldiers who cycled in and did what was supposed to be, I think, about a year in Afghanistan. And as we'll hear, it turned into a lot more than that. So first of all, Francisco Morales. Hi, Francisco.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Francisco was a platoon sergeant. And William Dunn. Hi, William.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate it. How you doing?
Good to talk to you. And William Dunn was a squad leader.
Yes, sir.
And I met you guys in really, I think I want you to describe it. And Francisco, maybe you can start, but Forward Operating Base Tillman, which was named after an American football player who was killed in Afghanistan, but actually had never been to FOB Tillman. This was named in his honor, but he was never deployed to FOB Tillman, as I understand it. But FOB Tillman was first of all, in the middle of nowhere. And for me, it was like walking back into kind of like a World War I fort or something. What was that place?
So FOB Tillman was a smaller base at first, and it was kind of like an outpost for the Special Forces unit who was doing missions in and out of that area. And then when they decided to make it more part of the big picture operation, they went ahead and started a small fire base camp there that was initially taken over by the 82nd Airborne Division. So we took their place and we established the fire base Tillman that you got used to, and we made the defenses a lot better, especially up on OP4 and OP1, where the high points we had soldiers guarding the area. And you're absolutely right. It was kind of like, they called it like the last outpost. It was kind of like something from prehistoric wars that you would see, like the guys, like definitely the mountaineers from 10th Mountain back in World War II up in the Alpines or something. But you're absolutely right. It seemed like something from an older time of war.
William, a hell of a place to call home for about a year, right?
I've got kinship with Tillman. Along with Frank, I was in Triple Deuce at the time in the 2003-2004 deployment. Frank, I believe you were in 287. You stayed hold after that deployment. I was down the road at 2nd of the 22nd Infantry. And we were running and gunning with the big boys out there. I can tell you what, it was the greatest adventure of my life, that first deployment. And I happened to be on the ground the day Pat Tillman was killed. I remember walking over to my 240 gunner, who happens to be from England himself, and looking at him, and I said, "This isn't good, man. Something went wrong," because it just. So for me, in that first deployment, being on the ground and seeing that chaos when Pat Tillman was killed, we all kind of knew something was wrong. So it was only fate that in Afghanistan in that 2003-2004 deployment, we caught wind that 287 was going to do something spectacular. 287 was going to start in a unit much like Frank had started in his first unit in the Army, which is, it's almost like the winning the lottery. Because we had a chance to be NCOs at the ground level and get flooded with brand new privates. And then Frank, there is no Tomahawks without Frank, and there is no Tillman without the Apaches. So it's kind of one of those things where fate brought me to Frank's platoon, and then I ended up fighting on FOB Tillman for 485 days for Pat Tillman. That was my victory ride for sure.
485 days, Francisco. Why was it 485 days?
So we did our tour there the year, and a lot of stuff happened to us then, and we flew off into Kuwait, and 24 hours later, one of my fort observers comes to me tear-eyed, and he's telling me that we're getting sent back. And so Captain Horrigan and I, we ran to where the phones are at, and we both call our wives, and they're both in the church. They're sitting across the church from each other, not near each other, and
back
they
in
were
the
getting
US.
the word. back in the U.S. right on base in the chapel, and they were getting the word that we were getting extended. Everybody in the unit back in Afghanistan knew, but we were the first group coming back from Afghanistan in Kuwait, and we didn't know. So we found out literally from our wives that, hey, you guys are being extended. So when we were able to contact our unit, they were telling us that the 4th Brigade that from 10th Mountain out of Fort Polk, Louisiana, that replaced us, things were going bad really quick for them. And they brought us back and they kicked them out and sent them home.
Yeah, I think people don't, you got to try and track and follow this, because the Marines go in, they do 6-month tours, they go out. You guys were there for a year
Yep.
of hard deployment, where you're seeing action constantly or under threat constantly. And after a year, you're flowing home to Kuwait. You tell your wives you're coming home, and suddenly you learn in Kuwait, where you're just an intermediate staging area for U.S. forces to go home, you are going back to FOB Tillman.
The rip out with that unit, we were pleading. We were pleading with them. They you're in the hornet's nest, man. Like, the shit's real here, and that rip was very emotional for us because we had fought tooth and nail. I mean, my memory got defragged and wiped, so I have very specific memories about FOB Tillman in that year. But what I've been doing is reaching out to the fellow Tomahawks and trying to put the pieces in. But when you talk about that extension, I used that extension in a vignette. I went on to do a lot of instructing after this, and I would talk about resilience, because that alone was the craziest. I've never heard of another story like this, is that we were intermittent, like we were in between going. So there was a plane that had already landed at Fort Drum. That was a piece of us. Our first sergeant was on that flight to prep the Fort Drum for our return. They locked them. So the story goes, the plane landed at Wheeler Sackett, and the MPs had to escort everybody off. The families were standing there with their signs, and
welcome home.
They refueled that plane, and the people that were on the ground had 2 weeks on the ground. They had to get back on a plane. Yeah. There's a plane that flew back to Kuwait, and then Frank and our platoon, we, like Frank said, the chaplain came in and just laid that on us. And then I looked at Frank, and he's like, I got to stage some shit. I got to collect the rest of the company in Kuwait to stage you guys going back. So when the generals came in and told us, they were like, hey, listen, this is a shit deal. This doesn't happen. So you're going to go to a big base and work the gates there. We're going to try to make it as easy as possible. So in this time, there's all kinds of communication coming in. And then that changed in a second. They're like, bullshit, you're going right back to Tillman. So I looked at Frank, and I grabbed my squad in a gun team. And Frank was like, I'll stay here because I got to link it with First Sergeant and push everybody to you. So Sergeant Ingle and my squad in a gun team flew back to Tillman, and we walked into shit.
You walked into shit in what way?
The unit had broken so many trucks. We had only been gone a week, 2. Right. I don't even think. And it was devastation. I'm like, have you guys even gone down that road in a week? Because we go down that road every single day.
So Frank, can you give me some idea of what you guys lived through in that year and a half? In terms of, I mean, when I was there, people need to realize that FOB Tillman was as close to the Pakistan border as you could probably get. You guys were constantly getting attacks, some of them sustained attacks, some of them hit and run attacks. When we went on patrol with you, we were told, and I think Frank, you were probably the one that told me, that you have a 50% chance of getting hit today. One of our Humvees will probably get hit on that patrol by an IED or by an ambush. It was that bad there.
Yes, and even back from the beginning, right before we left Fort Drum, initially we were supposed to be a different outpost, and then we got the leadership got called in, and we had to talk to the 82nd Airborne Command, who were over there, because on that base, OP4 on the outpost, which is about 6-7 clicks away from the actual FOB Tillman, they got overran, and the U.S. soldiers from 82nd had to flee from that area. So we went over there and had this discussion with them about how this is where it's at now for them. So that kind of, I already knew it was going to be a different deployment for my first one. And that's what I told my guys. I don't care what you did on your first one. This is going to be different. I have a feeling it is. So I want you in that right mindset. And sure enough, we were right. So we knew going in that this was the place that was going to be, full of contact and a lot of enemy around the area and a lot of probing. So we just prepared ourselves for that. And sure enough, I think it was the first day my platoon was out doing a little recon patrol at OP1. And so a little kid flagged us down and there was a mine in the ground. And this is when we were with part of the 82nd group. And from that point on, it was kind of like they were confused on what to do. So we just took over. And sure enough, one of the Afghan National Guardsmen who was with us, without permission, he just went right to the IED site to check it out. And it went off. It went off right under his toes. And surprisingly, the guy survived. We were all like, what the heck just happened? But that was first day. And we knew from that point on that this is how crazy it's going to get, because that area where it went off was essentially a safe area. So right after that, we're up at the OP4. OP4 is being hit by mortars, and artillery rounds. We're starting to go out on patrols, and then we're getting ambushed on patrols. And it just seemed that every other day something's going on with our platoons that are out there, our 3 platoons that are out there.
How many soldiers were on the FOB Tillman?
I want to say there's probably around 160 of us.
Right. So
in
addition to the FOB, if you think about a bicycle wheel, the FOB is the center, and then you have these little OPs that go. I climbed one of them, and maybe you remember the elevation, but I couldn't breathe for 5 minutes after we climbed that thing with gear to go and talk to soldiers who were up there, probably like 8 or 9 of them, and then they would also have some Afghan soldiers with them. And those OPs would push out from the FOB at nighttime to see if the enemy was coming in, and they would protect the FOB. Essentially, they were their kind of the early warning spot, right?
Exactly. We'll talk about OP1 because you spent a lot of time up there.
I certainly can. And sir, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you. I've watched your video many times. You were talking to my squad leader, McCarthy, on the OP. And I'm sorry I hadn't recognized you, but then the cadence of your voice, I've watched it many times. OP1 is, because I'd really like to talk about something that kind of gives credibility to this whole Tillman name. There was a mission where, so counterinsurgency was the way to go. We knew that we had great Afghan National Army brothers. So, those guys would fight alongside us anytime, any day, I fell in love with the Afghan culture so much through their soldiers, because I saw how they're just amazing people. The Afghan people are the most amazing people. So we started to make contact on a simple platform of communication with Pakistan, because you had mentioned how close we are to Pakistan. So OP1 sits right above FOB Tillman. When you would look down, you can see what we had. And then Big Ugly was across. And if you looked out across the Dashta, 7.5 clicks, there's OP4. So from OP1 to OP4 is the ridge line. That line of demarcation, you could argue that any minute of any day. There was no line. But we were observing Pakistan, much like century to century over the line, just watching each other. The communication was supposed to be made through FOB Tillman with the Pakistan commanders. So one of the first missions that we went out, I took lead on that one, and I said, well, shit, I'll go do that. So I took a bunch of Tomahawks with me. I took 14 total.
Tomahawks, by the way, is the name of your unit.